Hey there, starting Instagram live, but my camera keeps tipping over. So, hey, how's it going? Day whatever of the coronavirus. I still don't know, is it Thursday or is it like 2045? Like the time has just slipped away. We're clearly in the era of AC, which is after coronavirus. Last month it was BC and it feels like a forever ago. Like a month ago, again, I was in the Netherlands. A week before that I was in California and we were talking about the virus, but it wasn't like we were thinking, oh, time to lock down. Or we certainly weren't thinking the government was going to completely lock us down. So, hold on, I'm going to have some water. So just real quickly, what new data do we have and what does it mean? And, maybe we can talk about some of the things we've learned during this time, if we've learned anything. But basically, the most important city in the world right now for coronavirus is to see what's happening in, unfortunately, New York City, the city where I'm in right now. So in New York City, the number of new hospitalizations has been going down every single day. A few weeks ago, even just like 10 days ago, I think number of new hospitalizations was over 1,000. 2 days ago, it was down to 53 from 1,000. And that's incredible. So what hospitalizations is a lagging indicator. It's not like you get sick and you go to the hospital the next day. So in order for hospitalizations to go down today, that means 10 days ago, fewer people were infected, because hospitalization tends to happen 10 days after infection. So that I wonder what's going to happen 10 days from now. It probably means almost nobody is getting infected right now. And in fact, I know very few people now who are getting the virus. A month ago, every day, another friend of mine was getting the virus and either having symptoms or no symptoms or serious symptoms. I knew at least 2 friends who were hospitalized. Fortunately, nobody passed away. But now I don't know anybody who's getting sick from the virus in New York City. And in fact, number of hospitalizations, again, this weekend was at 53, which means 10 days ago, very few people were getting infected, which means probably now almost nobody new is getting infected. So someone says 5K more last night. I don't know what that means. In the United States alone, the graph seems to be stabilizing. Remember, a few weeks ago, or about a month ago, I said, look for April 15th to be the peak in the United States. It actually looks like the peak may have hit in the past few days. But what I mean by that is that the number of new deaths is not growing exponentially. It seems to be stabilizing or going down. And let's not forget, right now, I'm looking at the chart on worldometers.com. Right now, there's 845 new deaths in the United States, but 600 of them are coming from New York. So most of the deaths are coming from New York. In New York City, the number is declining. So it does mean that what we said about a month ago, which is that by mid-April, give or take, the number of deaths in the United States will start to decline. And then here's the question. And a lot of people get very emotional about this. A lot of people have been very emotional throughout this whole coronavirus. And by the way, Jay, I hope you're on there. There's some good questions coming. And I want to make sure we capture them. And Jay, you should send me the link of the latest Google Docs file when you can with the questions. But people are getting very agitated. Like if you say the economy should reopen because the number of new deaths is going down in New York, or number of new hospitalizations is going down in New York City to almost nothing, some people get very upset. Like, oh, what? We're going to open up the economy and suddenly you don't care about all the new deaths that will happen from all the new exposures? And that is such a dumb question to ask. Like, first off, yes, I care about every death is important. But what was the goal of the lockdown? When they created the lockdown, 100% of the officials said the goal of the lockdown is to flatten the curve. What is the goal of flattening the curve? The goal was to avoid overwhelming the healthcare system. Well, the healthcare system, with only 53 new hospitalizations in New York City on Saturday, the healthcare system is doing fine in the worst city on the planet for this. So, mission accomplished, goal achieved. So now, what does that mean? Well, now some people are saying, well, you can't reopen the economy until there's 0 deaths. Are you insane? Because how do you get, oh, what if I say we can't reopen the economy every year until there's 0 deaths from flu, or there's 0 deaths from car accidents? No more reopening the economy because people are going to be driving to work and there's going to be car accidents every day. Well, I mean, there are some states with millions of people, but less than 50 deaths, and they've shut down their entire economy. They've shut down schools for millions of kids. They've shut down the way millions and millions of people pay for food, pay for rent, pay for healthcare. You can't. Shutting down the economy, I don't want to say it was a mistake, but it was probably a mistake because we don't know. Everyone's saying, well, clearly social distancing worked. And I'm willing to believe that. Like, I've been social distancing this entire time. But we don't know. There was not like an imaginary New York State that didn't have social distancing where we can compare. That's what's called science. That's a scientific experiment. We're just guessing that social distancing worked. Now, reason why we guess that is because if you locked everybody in a closet for 3 weeks and they're not allowed to talk to anybody or touch anybody, the coronavirus will be eliminated from the planet. That's clear. That's just the definition of how these things work. But we didn't go into a 100% lockdown like that. No place did. We did social distancing, which is we stayed far apart. We shut down all businesses. We wore masks and gloves. And I did as well. And, you know, maybe it worked. It looks like it worked. But we don't know. Somewhere in between keeping everybody chained to a closet and having complete openness and everybody just hanging out in a big crowd in Madison Square Garden, something in between there probably works the best. It's probably not either extreme. But people will get really upset. Like if you say, oh, we need to move from this extreme to something in the middle, they're like, oh, are you saying we should die so you could make more money? No, I'm not saying that at all. My lifestyle doesn't change one way or the other. But I'm saying in terms of decision making, you already told me you cared about don't overwhelm the healthcare system. Well, flattening the curve did that. We don't know. So here's why we don't know if social distancing worked. It's because every state had different policies, and yet the curve was the same. In fact, New York City probably had more social distancing and more of a lockdown than any other state, and we had the most deaths. And Sweden is another example. Sweden has had no lockdown, and already their number of new deaths per day is going down to almost 0 in a country with, 30 or 40 million people in it. So we just don't know what works. And yes, I agree with the point of view. Assume the worst, prepare for the best, prepare for the worst, but hope for the best. I don't know what the saying is. But we know now probably a complete economic lockdown was not called for because many more people are suffering now. This was when we thought there was going to be 10 million deaths in the United States. That clearly was never going to happen. Those models, they already admit, those models were completely wrong. I'll read to you. I wrote a book in 2011, The Wall Street Journal Guide to Investing in the Apocalypse. And my first chapter was called Pandemic. And here's a sentence from that chapter. And this is written in 2011. In an actual pandemic, there will be fewer lives lost than initially predicted. So we already kind of guessed that. And now the key is, now that we know that that's true, how do we adjust policy in the future? There's no point saying, what should we have done? There's no point blaming anybody because nobody has seen this situation before. We don't know what should have been done. But a total economic shutdown affected the lives of maybe billions of people, but at the very least, hundreds of millions of people. And people are depressed, people are anxious, suicide rates are up, child abuse is up. I'll give you one example. People always say, well, what's your source? What's your source? As if like I'm somehow I have a reason to make up fiction. But in Indiana, there's a hotline, a mental health hotline, 211, you can call it. On average, before this started, 1,000 people a day were calling it. But now, during this crisis, every day, 25,000 people a day are calling it, often with thoughts of suicide or massive depression or whatever. So we know that the economic shutdown has taken a massive toll on the mental health of American society. So now we need to focus on how to bring back a healthy society and bring it back to work. Now, and then again, this is not about profits for Jeff Bezos. Who the fuck cares about him? This is about the mental health and well-being of everyone. Here's how society works. People go to work and they create food, they create medicine, they provide healthcare, they write books, they make the toothpaste you use, they drive taxi cabs, then they pay taxes, and that's how the government makes money. And then the government can use that to build bridges or to send mail or whatever. It's not the other way around. It's not the government writes you a check and then you live. Like, that's not how government and economy work together. The economy is society. The government is there as a service. The government provides one important service: to help those who are too weak to help themselves. So the elderly, the impoverished, people who have lost jobs where they, it wasn't necessarily, they were trying their best or whatever. The government's job is to help those who are too weak to help themselves. And hopefully those situations are temporary. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. The government's role is not to protect and fund all 300 million people. That has never been the government's role. And the few countries that have tried that, the Soviet Union, China, those countries, those systems have failed. Our system, the US system, whether you call it capitalist or semi-socialist or whatever you want to call it, we have created so much innovation. We have created quality of life throughout the entire world. And I'm not like, go America, go America. We've made a lot of mistakes as well. We've gone into these faulty wars. We've done many horrible things. But the system itself, where the economy creates innovation, and by the way, the economy normally welcomes in all many immigrants who are, of course, legally documented. That's always been the case. But those are the people who go to our graduate schools and start our Silicon Valley companies and have generations of future innovation. But now we're saying, no, you have to shut the economy down. The government will take care of everything. That system has never worked in the history of humankind. The history of humankind is that creative people create, hardworking people work hard, they all pay taxes, and that gives the government the power and money to help people weaker who can't help themselves. So that's how society works. And by the way, community also should help people who can't help themselves. So right now in this time, there's been a lot of great opportunities to volunteer, to work on food lines, to Zoom with the elderly who feel lonely, to volunteer for crisis text lines, to contribute to GoFundMes for people who need more help. Community has been a powerful role in charity. And the private sector has also been powerful. There are now over 30 trials for cures and vaccines for coronavirus. By the way, I want to address the vaccine issue. My mother had polio, and she had polio in the early 1940s, right before there was a polio vaccine. The polio affected how she walks. She couldn't walk for a long part of her childhood. To this day, she has problems walking. When I was a kid, she had a massive limp. So all the other kids, of course, being the nice, gentle kids that they were, they would always make fun of me because of my mom's limp. But my mom had polio, and unfortunately, only a few years later, polio was wiped off the planet because Jonas Salk created a vaccine. Now, vaccines work, but why is everyone obsessed with the coronavirus vaccine? We've been trying to make a vaccine for the common cold for 50 years. The common cold is a type of coronavirus. Think of this virus that's been a pandemic as a mutated common cold that is slightly more fatal than the common cold. We're not going to come up with a vaccine. There's no vaccine for the common cold. But there are plenty of medicines that they're testing, over 30 medicines being tested to see if we can either be kind of prevent during coronavirus season, prevent it, or alleviate, reduce the symptoms. This coronavirus is not a very deadly virus, despite what people are thinking. It's looking like the fatality rate is somewhere between 0.1% to 0.3%. Remember, the initial projections were up to like 10% fatality rate, but that's just ridiculous. I think Ebola, though, had a huge... Here's the thing you have to know. The more contagious a virus is, the lower the fatality rate. So Ebola had a 30% fatality rate, an enormous fatality rate. But Ebola wasn't as contagious because it killed people so fast, dead people can't transmit a virus or a disease. So a mild virus, it gets very contagious, and fewer people die because people live long enough to spread the disease to as many people as possible. So that's why the fatality rate for swine flu, the fatality rate for coronavirus are much lower than initially predicted. That's why I wrote that sentence in my book, The Wall Street Guide to Investing for the Apocalypse. Again, written in 2011, the actual sentence is, in an actual pandemic, there will be fewer lives lost than were initially predicted. It's happened now, it happened in swine flu, it happened in SARS. I remember because I was a professional investor during all these periods. I had to be very careful just in case people's projections were correct, which they never, ever were. So now, if I say something like, look, we need to always question the experts, everyone gets upset at me. But what's wrong with questioning the experts? I'll tell you a story. So I think it was the 1830s, there was this one hospital where something like 1 out of 6 women were dying right after giving birth. 1 out of 6 women. In other hospitals, maybe it was something like, 1 out of 30, 1 out of 40. So what was going wrong in this hospital? And this one doctor, his name was Ignaz Semmelweis, he said, well, some doctors are going straight from the morgue to delivering babies. And those patients tend to be the ones who died. And so he said, he put a policy in place, do not, every time you leave the morgue, wash your hands. Before you deliver a baby, wash your hands. And guess what? Every expert disagreed with him. All of the doctors disagreed with him. They said, you're insane. They actually put him in a mental hospital. They thought he was so insane. Of course, now we know he was correct. It's called germ theory, and it's the commonly accepted way of spreading any diseases involving germs or viruses. So you wash your hands as a technique. That was developed by him. But all of the experts, 100% of them, said he was insane. So they laughed at him. They laughed him out of town. He had to move to a new city. And then they laughed at him. And he basically died penniless in a mental asylum. So when people say, oh, we've got to trust the experts, no, we have to first trust our own common sense, but then do the research. Go down the rabbit hole if you're interested and do the research. Look at what the data is. Understand what the flaws are in mathematical modeling. Study the past history. The WHO, the World Health Organization, predicted the past 10 out of 3 pandemics. Like their prediction, track record is not very good. So study what has happened. Now, the other thing is, again, did social distancing work? Did it not? Let's just say it worked. We don't actually know. There's no science behind that. So we have to ask ourselves, well, maybe we went too far. When you have an economic shutdown, there are many more lives lost. There are people who have cancer who couldn't get treated. People who have heart trouble who couldn't get treated. People who have hypertension who couldn't get treated. There was suicides. There was drug addictions. There was domestic abuse. There was child abuse. There's evidence of this all over the place if you go. There's a rise in divorces. So what are the collateral? Many businesses now are going to go out of business. Not every restaurant is going to reopen. I'm sorry to say, even with this stimulus package, many restaurants will remain closed. Many of those who were fired by those restaurants will stay unemployed. But so it's a good chance we overacted compared with Sweden, which had a very similar curve to us, but not a single lockdown. Italy, total lockdown, but they were already peaking around the time of their lockdown. Singapore, no lockdown. South Korea, no lockdown. And you could say, well, they did heavy testing. Well, the United States is doing heavy testing now. We're doing more testing per capita than they did. So sure, let's keep testing. But some people are saying now we can't go turn the economy back on until there's a vaccine. There's never going to be a vaccine that works the way normal vaccines work. There might be cures, but there's not. It doesn't make sense. This is a virus that mutates constantly. It's just like the flu. There's a flu vaccine, but it doesn't really work that well. Like maybe it works 50% of the time because the flu mutates. This virus, coronavirus, is mutated. It's already mutated, I don't know, 1,000 times since it started. So we don't know if a virus is going to work, but we do know that there are medicines that probably will alleviate symptoms. And if we keep politics out of it, maybe we'll start to really scientifically explore those cures and not be worried for the second wave, the third wave, next season, whatever. So somebody asked me a question, which is, how do I make a list? And I'm going to talk about other things relating to, this data, and I'll answer questions about anything, about whatever. But somebody asked me, how do I take a list and then expand on it? So a list I made the other day is classes I'm interested in creating. Because I do think online learning is going to be a key. Any two words we have to remember for the new normal. The word remote. So everything that was not remote is going to get more remote. So grocery shopping will start to get more remote. Delivery will start to get more remote. Learning, well, all the kids were sent home, so remote learning is going to get more remote. Working, okay, we might still go back to an office, but they'll be more flexible and be more flexible about working at home, remote. E-commerce, I'm not going to go to a clothing store. I'll just buy clothes on Amazon. It's going to be more remote. So anything more with the word remote could be a good business model. The other thing is acceleration. This is very important. Everything that was going to happen in 5 years is now going to happen in 1 year. So every good or bad, like if colleges were going to shut down in 10 years, it's probably going to happen in 1 or 2 years. If a restaurant was going to fail in 3 years, it's going to probably happen in a month or two. If you were going to get a divorce in 6 years, you're probably going to get it within the next 6 months. So I would say the word acceleration is right. If there was going to end up being less traveling, there's going to be less traveling now. If airlines were going to go bankrupt in 4 years, they're going to go bankrupt now. So if WeWork was going to go out of business in 3 years, it's probably going to go out of business in 3 weeks. So anything that was going to happen in 3 or 4 years is going to happen in a much more accelerated way. So remote and accelerated are keys for coming up with investments and opportunities in the new normal. And so I made a list, classes I could teach online. So I could teach a class on business. I could teach. So here's my list. Here's my waiter's pad list. So I could teach a class on business, investing, writing, podcasting, productivity, learning, idea generation, games, comedy, persuasion. And the reason I picked those 10 things, I had a criteria. Everything had to be related to something I've done professionally and something I was successful at enough to make a good amount of money. So, I don't know if I made money out of specifically productivity, but everything else I've made significant money from writing, podcasting, investing, business, and so on. So then the next day, I take one of these, investing, and here's an important thing to know about learning and about skill. And this applies to whether you're studying the coronavirus or whether you're leading a country or whether you're an investor or whether you're a writer. There's no such skill as business. There's no such skill as investing. There's no such skill as writing. So every major skill is really a collection of micro skills. So for instance, the next day I made a list. If I was going to teach an investing class, what are all the micro skills that make someone a good investor? So the class would be that I would teach what's value investing, what's growth investing, what's piggyback investing, which is a term I made up. What is arbitrage and why is that the secret to all investing? What are derivatives and how you can use it to make even more money? How do you invest in real estate? How do you invest in private companies? How do you understand what risk is and the role of risk in investing? How can you invest in other things like prediction markets or Bitcoin or whatever? How do you analyze like new situations? And I also throw in what's my personal checklist when I make an investment. So again, all of those skills together are independent of each other. If you're good at value investing, you might not be good at growth investing and vice versa. But all of those skills together make someone a good investor. Writing has many skills. There's coming up with a plot. There's coming up with characters. There's writing a sentence. There's writing, how do you define your chapters? How do you outline? So there's all sorts of skills that have nothing to do with each other. Stand-up comedy. There's sense of humor. There's likability. There's stage presence. There's voice inflection. Again, there's crowd work. There's dealing with hecklers. So there's all these micro skills that create one skill of stand-up comedy. So every skill that's worth learning, divide it up into micro skills, and that's how you begin meta learning the skill. So this is very important. With coronavirus, it was important to understand, and if you're good at meta learning, you could get up to speed very quickly on coronavirus. What is the virus and how does it affect the human body? What are the demographics of the people who get it versus the people who die from it versus the people who don't get it? What does the curve look like in every region that gets it? And then of course is understanding the economic effects of it. What happens in a shutdown? What happens in a lockdown? What industries are affected most? What industries are not affected? What industries are horribly affected? So there's all these meta skills for understanding a crisis situation that you should apply for every crisis. You could have applied it for Brexit. You could have applied it for 9/11. You could have applied it for the financial crisis. Really understanding what is happening is the key to making decisions that could help you and your family. The financial crisis is a really interesting case in point. In the financial crisis, everybody was saying, oh my God, everything's going to go out of business. They didn't understand the effects of the stimulus. So understanding how the Federal Reserve works was critical to understanding the 2008 crisis. Understanding what caused it. There was a law that was passed in 2007 that changed how banks treat their debt. The recession and then the crisis happened after that. And then the day they changed the rule back was the day the crisis ended. So understanding what causes these crisis points is a key to knowing how to deal with it both personally and as a society. So my opinion is, based on coronavirus, the economy is going to come back sooner rather than later. By the way, this is neither here nor there about Trump, but I don't like it if, a president of the United States shouldn't let anybody bully him into a political decision. So whether it's, healthcare officials or other officials or whatever, he needs to Harry Truman famously said, the buck stops here. The president is the person who makes the decision. So if the president thinks the economy is best to reopen, but he's afraid of what people will think of him, then in my opinion, that makes him a poor leader right now. Maybe the worst leader in history if he, considering how many tens of millions of people are being damaged by this. Or he could be what's called the profile in courage. John F. Kennedy wrote this great book, Profiles in Courage, about politicians who stood up for what they knew what was right, even if everybody else would hate them. So Trump should say, I don't care if I'm elected or reelected, I'm going to do the right thing. And then he should just start doing the right thing, whatever he decides that is. I'm not making a political statement. I'm not saying he's good or bad. It's just, if he believes the economy should reopen, he should tell everybody who doesn't believe it to shut the hell up. And he should do what he thinks is correct. And, we'll see. Again, I don't know about you, but I'm seeing the effects. You look at Michigan. Governor Whitmer in Michigan, she is so obsessed with the lockdown. You're not allowed to walk across the street between two houses you're on. You're not allowed in the street at all. You have to go in the street to get vitamin D, to be healthy. But she says no, total lockdown. And something like 3% of Michigan, 3% of the population of Michigan, they've joined a Facebook group to say we need to get the economy reopened. People in Michigan are desperate to get the economy reopened. They're going to die without the economy reopening. Again, there's no difference between economy and society. So I'm going to answer some questions first. I don't see Jay's list. Let me see. Jay, do you have your list? Are you there? Let's quickly find Jay's list. Uh, I don't see his list. Oh, here we go. So, what are 10 ideas for how a restaurant can survive now? Great question, because that is a super difficult question. Jay, great question. What are 10 ideas for how a restaurant can survive right now? I honestly don't know the answer. I think restaurants should change into food trucks. I would much rather prefer ordering from remember that movie Chef with, by the way, Scott Steindorf, if you're on this IG Live, I know you're on the IG Live occasionally. You're the producer of the movie Chef with Jon Favreau. So Chef was a great story about this amazing chef who started a food truck and refound his love for food rather than just the politics of a kitchen. So I think restaurants should turn into food trucks or just set themselves up for pure delivery. But I'll think a little bit more about this. But I run a bar slash, I own a bar slash comedy club. I think it's going to be very difficult. I think the notion of a third place, so there's a concept called the third place, which is always that place between home and work where you like to spend time. Like a bar is a great example of a third place, or a bowling alley on bowling night, or a stand-up comedy club. I think the notion of a third place is going to disappear, and we're going to have to, we don't know what's going to replace it. But I think restaurants, more home delivery, more cooking a week's worth of meals in advance for people and having people subscribe to that. Like, I would buy a week's worth of meals from my favorite restaurant and have it delivered to me at the beginning of a week so that I have food for the week and so on. What is the future of writers? Well, great question. I think book reading has gone down and has been replaced in part by podcasts and YouTube and TikTok and so on. I think most books should be magazine articles, and most magazine articles should be paragraphs or tweets. Like, I think publishers too often take a magazine article and say, oh, let's make a book out of it. There's no book. It's just a magazine article. Books should be smaller. Books should be, some books should still be 200 pages, but most books should be 10 to 20 pages. I could write a book about coronavirus in 20 pages. I don't have to stretch it out to make 300 pages. So I think in the future, books are going to be smaller and more easily digestible. So I'm writing a new book right now, and for the first time in many years, I'm using a mainstream publisher, HarperCollins. Does that mean I think self-publishing is not good? No. On my one of my Facebook groups, every month I give a new Facebook book challenge, a 30-day book challenge. I still think you can write a book in 30 days, no matter what. Take a book that you love that's lasted for 1,000 years. So, Sun Tzu's The Art of War, or Lao Tzu's the Tao Te Ching, or the Bhagavad Gita, or even the Bible, or I don't know. There's a million books from 2,000 years ago. Take the structure of that book and apply it to something you love right now, like the Tao of golf, or the inner game of tennis, or Zen and the art of archery. Take something old, combine it with something new. Take the structure of the old, because we know the old book has been focus grouped by billions of people over 2,000 years. So we know that structure works and people love it. And now if you apply it to something new, you can make a book with the combination, idea sex. You could do the Tao of Star Wars and have 80 small pages, just all the different philosophies of Star Wars. So boom, you could write that book in 30 days. And even make it silly. You could do Zen and the art of Prince Harry and have everything Prince Harry's done in his life and apply it to concepts of Zen. And boom, you have a book. So that might be a more frivolous book. But those are the sorts of things that you could write a book and self-publish in 30 days and it could be popular. I went with a mainstream publisher for my next book because, I don't know, every now and then I kind of want an injection of brand. I'll be honest. I felt like after the Bitcoin ads, which were in 2017, I felt like I needed kind of a brand injection from a place like HarperCollins. So I went with a mainstream publisher. Had to do it. And they paid. So How can average investors take advantage of the collapse in commercial real estate? I think the best thing to do is wait for the collapse and wait for whatever bailout will eventually happen and then start investing in commercial real estate. I think it's very hard to bet on a bankruptcy, so I wouldn't do that. What technical skills should recent graduates focus on? That's a really great question because there are many skills, but this specifically says technical skills. Obviously, computer programming is important. Not everybody's meant to be a computer programmer, but study robotics, study drones, study AI. You don't need to be a computer scientist. You don't need to be a computer programmer. Like, I know what gravity is without knowing all the math behind physics. So you don't have to be a computer scientist to read about robotics, to read about AI. My good friend Jamie Metzel, who's been on my podcast several times, he is a science fiction writer, and he was like an English major, but he became the world's expert on genomics, and he wrote his new book, Hacking Darwin, which really is the best book for explaining genomics and its role in the role in our lives in the next decade. So you don't need to be a PhD. Again, we're talking about the death of the expert. You don't need a PhD to be super knowledgeable about an area, to even be considered an expert. Jamie now is considered an expert on genomics. He doesn't have a PhD, doesn't have any background in science, and yet he wrote this very smart book. So, how do I monetize ideas? That's a great question. Before I get to that question, I just want to mention again how I want to ask you guys a question, and maybe Jay can track the answers. But so many words have become trigger words with people, and I don't know if it's for partisan reasons. For instance, if you say the coronavirus is like the flu, which I'm not saying, by the way, but if you say it, people will trash you. People will think you're an idiot. And yet, it turns out, what else? Like, the fatality rate of coronavirus is similar to the fatality rate, probably, of swine flu. How come I'm not allowed to say that? And then when you say the similarities, it allows you to explore the differences. So a difference between coronavirus and the flu is that if someone goes to the hospital with coronavirus and ends up on a ventilator, they're probably going to be on the ventilator for twice as long as someone who goes down to a ventilator from the flu. And then it allows you to study the science. Well, is that because they're older? Is that because of coronavirus itself? It allows you to ask important scientific questions. So where is all the hate coming from? Why do you hate people who use words like coronavirus is like the flu, or these models don't work, so we should reopen the economy? Oh, the amount of hate you're going to get, it's ridiculous. So, all right, I'm going to ask more questions. I'm going to answer more questions. How do you monetize ideas? So that's a great question. I'll tell you one time I had an idea for a website that combined social media with finance. And then I called up the CEO of thestreet.com, which was a public company, is a public company, or was a public company, and we set up a lunch for 1 week later. I called up a bunch of designers, and I sketched out every page of I made an idea list, which was, here's what every single page of my brand new website would look like. And then I called up designers and said, can you sketch out these pages for me? So then when I had lunch with this CEO, I showed him my new idea, and I said, it's idea sex. It's social media combined with finance. No one has done it before. And he said, this is great. When are you going to do it? And I said, well, I'm almost done. Here's the pages. And I showed him the sketches of every single page. And then he's like, how could you finish this without us? Let's do a deal together. And I said, sure. And I said, well, how about 50-50? 50 you, 50 me. And he said, no, I'm thinking more about you get 30%. And no. I said first, I was thinking 97-3. I get 97%, you get 3%. And you put ads all over your website pointing to my site. And he's like, I don't like 97-3. Let's make it 50-50. And so I said, yes. I didn't negotiate at all, because 50% of something is better than 99% of nothing. So then, it was only then that I actually made the website. Again, you always want to come up with ideas where you have very little downside and huge upside. So up until that moment, before I had a deal in place, I didn't put any work at all into this website other than making idea lists. And then I made the site. The street.com pointed to it on every single page. I started getting millions of users every single day. I worked really hard on it. And a few months later, and then what I did was I instantly put it up for sale. So I wanted to sell my half. I visited Google, AOL, Yahoo, Forbes, Reuters, Interactive Corp. I visited everybody. And the street.com said, we don't want Google owning 50% of this. You have to sell to us. So 4 months after the official launch of the site, I sold the entire business for millions of dollars to the street.com. Don't worry, I went bankrupt right afterwards because I was stupid, but that's how I monetized that particular idea. Another way you monetize an idea is, here's a great example. So a friend of mine, Mimi Icon, she started a YouTube channel. And she every day she'd go on YouTube. She's very beautiful. She'd go on YouTube and she would give these self-help, guidelines and show us her life. And she became a big YouTube hit. Underneath her YouTube channel was one link. She never mentioned this link in the YouTube video, but and she didn't sell ads on her YouTube videos. She just had this one link underneath the video, and it was to a hair extension company that she had started, that she and her husband Alex had started. And they were selling millions of dollars worth of hair extensions. They didn't do any advertising. It was just how she monetized her YouTube channel. And so there's all sorts of ways to monetize things. So I always say, use a spoke and wheel model. So the wheel is your core vision, but then there's many ways to monetize. So for instance, I write a blog, and sometimes my blog ideas go into podcasts. That's one way I monetize. Sometimes my blog ideas, I create a newsletter. That's another way to monetize. Sometimes my blog ideas, I send to other people as ideas for them, and then they might pay me for consulting or whatever. So always, you have your core thing that you're interested in. Let's say you're interested in cooking recipes. So write down your cooking recipes, throw in a little bit of idea sex, like, these are my Cajun Chinese cooking recipes. And now you could do a blog, you could do a podcast, you could do a TV show, you can write a book, you can make a course. So there's all sorts of spokes around that hub. And that's how you monetize ideas. Come up with as many spokes as possible around that core hub, and that the more money you will make. And how do you know if an idea will work? I talked about this the other day. Figure out what I call the conspiracy number of an idea. So what's a conspiracy number? So if I want to make, a friend of mine approached me. He had a great idea. And he said, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to make $1 million from this idea. And I said, let's look at the conspiracy number of you making $1 million within the next year or so from this idea. Because you've never written a book before, you have to write the book first, conspiracy number one. You have to convince an agent to like it, conspiracy number 2. The agent has to convince a publisher to like it, number 3. Yeah, the publisher has to convince bookstores to like it, conspiracy number 4, and then people have to buy it, conspiracy number 5. So that conspiracy number 5, too many things have to conspire for you to make $1 million off of a book idea. Instead, why don't you write a book, but then that's one spoke, but then make a course, and the book you're only selling for $10, but the course, sell that for $400 because it's very extremely valuable. Now you only need 20. Now you don't have any gatekeepers. You could just put the course on your website, go on a bunch of podcasts to market it, or make some very cheap Facebook ads. And then you only need 2,500 customers. You don't need to have 10,000 customers. You need 2,500 customers paying $400, and you'll make $1 million. So again, that had fewer conspiracy numbers because he took out several layers of middlemen and gatekeepers. The more you can take out gatekeepers, the more money you'll make. By the way, which is why employees make less money than entrepreneurs. When you're an employee and you create $1 of value, here are the gatekeepers. There's you, and you created $1 of value. In between you and that dollar is your boss, his boss, the CEO, the board of directors, the shareholders, on and on. So if you want to make the most of your dollar value, you have to get rid of the middlemen, and that means you have to start your own business. So every dollar value you create, 90% of it goes to you, 10% of it goes to employees, or whatever your ratio is, and boom, that's how you create value for yourself, is getting rid of the middlemen, or another way of putting it is reducing the conspiracy number of the idea. And I've never heard of this sort of concept before in terms of validating an idea. Let's see. So that's how I monetize ideas. I'm trying to think of other ways I've monetized ideas, because I'm constantly experimenting all the time. So for instance, I had an idea a little while ago. I want to make a card game similar to Cards Against Humanity. So I've made the game, I've made all the cards, or at least I've outlined them. And now, so it took me an hour or two, and it all came from idea lists that I made every day. And now I just have to send it off to a printer. We'll print it up. Then I'll put it on Kickstarter just to kind of assess how big the audience is. Again, this is just an experiment with very little money, very little time spent. I can actually fully test this experiment to see if this is a great idea or a bad idea before I put even, maybe printing it up will cost me $100, but that's it. No more money spent. And I can test an idea that could potentially be worth millions with just $100 and very little time. So you always want to have lopsided risk reward on every experiment. So very little risk, huge potential for reward. And no matter what, I will learn, even if the experiment fails. So thinking in terms of experiments, again, I've probably spoken about this. Malcolm Gladwell speaks about the 10,000 hour rule. Oh, you got to do something for 10,000 hours or you'll never be good at the violin. You'll never be a master of the violin. That is just BS. My view is do 10,000 experiments or do 1,000 experiments and you will be so far ahead of everyone else. It just takes one experiment for you to be a massive success at whatever it is you love doing. But imagine if 3 or 4 experiments succeed. And the key is every experiment you're going to be learning. So your knowledge is going to go up exponentially. So thinking in terms of experiments rather than hours is the way to succeed. Particularly if you're like me, if you're older and you want to have a new career or you're reinventing yourself or you just got fired during coronavirus, thinking in terms of experiments is so much more valuable than thinking in terms of 10,000 hours. But let's say I get interested in golf. By the time I do 10,000 hours of golf, I'm going to be 70 years old. I don't want to do that. But if I experiment, maybe there's different things I could do. Maybe I could be a golf player, but maybe I could be a writer about golf, or maybe I could create a fantasy golf game, or maybe I could make a YouTube channel about golf, or maybe I could read a book, The Inner Game of Golf, and how it applies to business, or whatever. So, or maybe something I learned about golf can help me find good investments. So again, experiments are the way to succeed and learn with very little downside, with huge upside, and you don't have to waste 10,000 hours on the 10,000 hour rule, which does not work. I remember I was sending emails back and forth with Anders Ericsson. He's the professor that originally came up with the 10,000 hour rule. He and Malcolm Gladwell popularized it in the book Outliers, which is an excellent book. So Anders Ericsson's a really great guy. I actually was involved in the very initial 10,000 hour rule experiments in the early 90s because I'm a chess master. A lot of the experiments were done on chess players. People who had 0 hours, people who had 3,000 hours, and people who had 10,000 hours. So I was in the middle category. I was a master, but not like a world champion. And so I was involved in those experiments that were being done at Carnegie Mellon, where I went to graduate school. And so I appreciated the 10,000 hour rule, but I wrote to him about comedy. Like, how does the 10,000 hour rule apply to stand-up comedy? And he just couldn't get his head around it. Like, how do you measure success? And there's no one way to measure success. So instead of listening to him, I started doing experiments. I would do stand-up comedy on a subway. I would do stand-up comedy in different parts of the lineup. I would do stand-up comedy in the street. I would do different styles of stand-up comedy. So everything was an experiment, and after I did an experiment, whether it worked or not for me, like, it didn't matter if I made people laugh on the subway. It was just me doing it was the experiment, and I learned a huge amount with very little downside and risking almost nothing. So how would I pitch Zoom to improve their product for a concept that improves participant engagement? So someone says, and this is a very important question, do you freely give the idea to Zoom? The answer is 150%. Just give your idea for free. If you say to Zoom, but knock, 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 you don't know who I am, but I have a great, fantastic idea for you, but you have to meet me and you might have to pay me. Zoom is just going to ignore you. They're not going to even write back to you. It's an insult to Zoom. They don't know you and you're writing this letter, please meet me because I have this great idea for you. They get those emails every day. So if you want to stand out, come up with good ideas for Zoom, explain why they're a good idea, explain it as simply as possible. So now you need writing skill to do that. And then just say, you don't need to give me any credit. This is your idea for free. Happy to talk more about it, but otherwise, you don't even need to reply. Give ideas for free because that sort of demonstrates if you show that you're abundant, then abundance will come to you. If you're like scarcity, like, oh no, you better pay me for this idea before you meet me, then they'll treat you like the scarce, afraid person you are. They won't even respond because you don't have faith in your abundance. You always have to act like I'm abundant with ideas. I can't even tell you how many people have stolen ideas of mine, but I don't care. You never should care. Because if someone smart, like a major Fortune 10 company once stole an idea of mine and they made a massive amount of money from it. Did I care? No. It got me excited actually because it showed that, oh, this great company made a great product that worked off of an idea that I had pitched them. And this has happened to me more than once. I've lost tons of opportunities because people stole ideas from me. But I have faith that I'm abundant on ideas. And this is just confirmation that my ideas are getting better and better. So I know I'm going to keep coming up with good ideas that I could apply. And you know what? If 1% of my ideas make me money, that's millions or tens of millions of dollars. So what I typically do is I described it. I write the letter and I say, here's the idea. You don't even need to call me. If you want to talk to me, no problem, but you don't need to. See you later. And 7 times out of 10, they'll write back to me and say, hey, could we have a phone call? Or do you want to have a lunch? Or do you want to have a dinner? And then maybe 1 out of 100 times, I actually make money from a letter like that. But if I wrote a letter and said, I have a great idea for you, can we meet? 0 out of 100 of my letters would work. Doesn't even matter if I had a connection. Nothing matters. You only make money by giving for free. So a great example is Google and Facebook. Google didn't charge people to use their search engine. Facebook didn't charge people to use their social network. Give for free and figure out other ways. There's a hub and then there's spokes. Google makes money off of the spokes. Advertising, selling data, GPS, Gmail, and they make money off of the spokes. The hub is their ingenious algorithm for a search engine, but the spokes are all the ways they make money. And so again, Google itself does that hub, the wheel and spoke model to monetize ideas, and also they're abundant. Once they had that core engine, they were abundant in all the things they can do with it. So I remember one time I pitched Google. I wanted to sell my business to Google. This is 13 years ago, 14 years ago. And I visited Google and oh my gosh, everybody seemed so smart. And they had this conference room where it was, you couldn't even it turned out half the conference room was in California from the wall was like a video display. And so you could see all the people lining up on the other side and all the people on this side. And that night I woke up in the middle of the night and I felt like I was 13 years old and I had a crush on the girl sitting next to me in class. And so 3 a.m, I wrote back to the person I met, the main person at Google that I met. And I wrote to her and I said, oh, I can't wait to work with you guys. I can't wait to see you guys again. I wrote exactly the same things I would write when I was 15 years old and talking to a girl. And by the way, that strategy never worked when I was 15. And it didn't work this time. Google never wrote to me again. So, or at least on that idea. So I don't recommend that approach. But Google, I loved the idea for a brief second of selling my company to Google and working for them, but it didn't work. I'll tell you another story about Google. So in 2001, a good friend of mine pitched me an idea. I hope people don't mind me telling these stories. So in 2000 or 2001, someone pitched me an idea. He said, there's this company called Oingo that's going out of business. We could buy 50% of the company for $1 million. I was running a venture capital fund, so we had $200 million to spend, so we could have done it. 50% of this company called Oingo for $1 million. And what did Oingo do? Oingo had a way of auctioning off words. People could buy a word, and it was like an auction environment. And I thought, okay, well, and my friend said, this is in the search engine space. And I'm like, forget it. Search engines are dead. Lycos, Excite, Alta Vista, you can't make money with a search engine. So we didn't do it. Google bought Oingo, and they sold 1%. They gave Oingo 1% of Google to buy Oingo. And then Oingo, they changed the name of Oingo to AdSense. And Oingo, or now AdSense, created 99% of Google's revenues over the next 20 years. So, and Google, of course, is worth $1 trillion. So that was my worst investment decision, was a decision of omission. I didn't invest in this company Oingo because I was too stupid to realize that search engines might have a viable business model. And boom, I lost out on probably, $100 million worth of value. So who knows? You can't live or die on any one decision, because you're going to make lots of bad decisions and lots of good decisions. The key is to just get better and better over time at coming up with ideas and making decisions. And by the way, making a decision is just a matter of how good are you at coming up with ideas, because you make a decision by listing all the pros and all the cons. Those are ideas, and you have to be very creative. Replace the word idea with possibility. You have to be very good at coming up with all the possibilities that are related to a decision, and that's how you make a good decision. So making ideas is the same as coming up with decisions, is the same as executing an idea. They're all part of the same package. So I'm going to do another question. When starting a business, is organic traffic more valuable or less valuable than paid traffic? Organic traffic is much more valuable than paid traffic. Paid traffic is kind of useless. Well, that's not true. So I'm invested in one company, and they have a great business model. Basically, let's say you live in Kansas City and you need a plumber. You'll just Google plumbers. So this company bought up all the SEO for plumber, the word plumber, and you'll go to their website. Oh, here's kansascityplumbers.com. That's not a real domain, but they'll buy kansascityplumbers.com. You'll go to kansascityplumbers.com. They'll hook you up with a plumber, and they get a fee for everybody they hook you up with. So they have this in all the cities, and they're expanding, and they make a ton of money. They're profitable every single month. Even this month, they're profitable. So that's a good, solid little business that I'm proud of. So more questions, and let's see. Oh my gosh, we only have 1 minute and 40 seconds remaining. So tomorrow I will talk more about investing and particular companies I'm looking at. We'll also look more at the new normal and what businesses maybe I'm thinking I could start, and I'll be very transparent about it. And I'll look at the latest data. I'll look at the latest things happening in the economy. There's always news every day. But thank you for coming. And I'm going to save this on my IG stories live. And I'm also going to save this within a day on YouTube. So good luck, and put any questions on Twitter or save them for this. And I'll see you tomorrow on IG Live at 2 p.m. same time. Thanks so much, everybody.